I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I'm here because I honestly don't know how to process what just happened with my family. I've been sitting with this for days, replaying everything in my head, wondering if I'm the crazy one or if things really are as messed up as they seem. After reading through countless posts like this, I decided I might as well share my story. Maybe someone out there will get it. To give some context, my family has always been a bit lopsided. I have a younger sister, Lisa, who's 23. Growing up, it was pretty clear who the favorite was. While I was expected to be responsible and independent from a young age, Lisa always seemed to get a pass. It wasn't outright stated, but it was there in the small things: who got scolded for missing curfew, who got an extra scoop of dessert, who got bailed out of every mistake. I told myself it was normal. Every family has its quirks, right? Fast forward to now. My 28th birthday was coming up, and I wasn't expecting much. Honestly, I would have been happy with just a nice dinner together or even a heartfelt phone call, but a few days before my birthday, my mom casually mentioned that they couldn't do anything for me this year. Times were tough, she said. Money was tight. They had to focus on priorities. I told her it was fine and not to worry about it. I'm not a kid anymore. I don't need gifts to feel special. I tried to be understanding. Things happen. The day of my birthday came, and it was exactly as low-key as I expected. I got a generic card in the mail with a quick love. Mom and Dad scrawled inside. The family group chat lit up for all of 2 minutes with some half-hearted happy birthday messages, mostly from extended relatives. My parents didn't even call. I brushed it off. Maybe they were busy. It wasn't worth making a big deal over. A couple of days later, though, I was scrolling through social media when I saw something that stopped me cold. Lisa had posted a picture of a brand new car, a shiny red compact SUV with a bow on top. The caption read something like, "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for the best surprise ever. Love you guys so much." My stomach dropped. This wasn't some cheap used car. This was new. It had dealer plates and everything. I don't know what hit me harder, the car itself or the flood of memories it brought back. Over the years, Lisa has been showered with things like designer bags, trips abroad, and even help with her rent when she decided to move to an expensive city. Meanwhile, I was the one taking extra shifts at a fast food joint in high school to save up for college, the one who had to figure out student loans on my own. I wasn't resentful then. At least I didn't think I was. But seeing that car, just days after being told my parents couldn't afford to do anything for my birthday, felt like a punch in the gut. I texted my mom asking about it. I didn't even accuse her of anything, I just wanted to understand. Her reply was short: Lisa needed it for work. It's not the same as a birthday present. That was it. No explanation, no apology for how it might have looked, nothing. When I tried to press further, she brushed me off, saying I was being ungrateful and that I didn't know the whole story. I didn't respond after that. What was the point? Later that evening, I vented to my best friend about everything. He was furious on my behalf, saying I should have called my parents out right then and there. But what would that even accomplish? They've always had their excuses. I know how it would go. They'd twist it around, make me out to be the problem, and Lisa would act like the innocent victim. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the car. It was about a pattern, years of being treated like an afterthought while Lisa got the world handed to her on a silver platter. For the first time, I started to really question things. Why was it always me making compromises, while Lisa got away with everything? Why did my parents think it was okay to prioritize her wants over my basic feelings? Was it because she was younger, more charming, easier to handle? Or was I just reading too much into it? Feeling stuck, I did what a lot of people seem to do in situations like this. I turned to Reddit. I laid it all out, trying to keep things as factual as possible, and hit post. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own stories of favoritism and told me I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt. Some even suggested I go low contact with my parents, but that felt too extreme. I wasn't ready to burn bridges just yet. What I did know, though, was that I couldn't keep brushing things off. Something had to change. Reading through the comments, I started to feel a little less alone. A lot of people told me this wasn't normal, that I deserved better. And maybe they're right. I'm not sure what my next step is, but one thing is clear: I'm done pretending everything's fine. If my family won't take me seriously, then maybe it's time I make them. Update 1. A week after my birthday and the car fiasco, my parents invited me over for dinner. It wasn't unusual. They like to have these family bonding dinners every month or so. Normally I'd go smile and play along like everything was fine, but this time was different. After reading through the Reddit comments and thinking about how unfair everything had been, I decided it was time to stop pretending. If they wanted to have a family dinner, we were going to talk about how this family actually worked. I arrived on time, walking into the house to the smell of roast chicken and the sound of Lisa's laughter coming from the dining room. I hung up my jacket and headed in, stopping short when I saw her holding up a keychain with a tiny red car on it, showing it off like a trophy. My parents were beaming, listening to her talk about how great the car drove and how she'd already named it. The three of them barely noticed me until I sat down. The atmosphere was casual at first, small talk about work, the weather, and Lisa's new job. She was glowing, talking about how the car made everything so much easier and how she couldn't imagine commuting without it. My parents chimed in about how proud they were of her, how she was really starting to take responsibility for her life. The words stung more than I expected, but I stayed quiet for a while, letting the conversation roll on. I figured I'd wait until the right moment to bring it up. That moment came halfway through dinner, as Lisa leaned back and casually mentioned how she was thinking of upgrading the stereo system in the car. I set my fork down and cleared my throat. "So this car," I started, trying to keep my tone even, "when you said you couldn't afford anything for my birthday, was that before or after you decided to buy Lisa a brand new vehicle?" The room went silent. My dad looked up from his plate, eyebrows raised, while my mom's smile faltered. Lisa, of course, had no such hesitation. She smirked and leaned forward. "Well, I needed the car," she said. "You don't exactly need a birthday present, do you?" My mom jumped in quickly, like she was trying to diffuse the tension. She explained that Lisa's old car had broken down and she needed reliable transportation for her new job. It wasn't about playing favorites, it was about practicality. My dad nodded along, adding that they'd done what they thought was best for the family. I didn't let it go. I pointed out that while Lisa had been getting help for years, cars, trips, rent money, I'd been handling everything on my own since I turned 18. College bills, emergencies, I'd managed all of it without asking them for a dime. Was it really so unreasonable to expect a little acknowledgement on my birthday? That's when things started to spiral. My mom said I was overreacting, accusing me of turning something small into a big drama. My dad chimed in, saying it wasn't a competition and that I should be happy for Lisa. Lisa, meanwhile, sat there twirling her new keychain and throwing in the occasional comment about how jealousy isn't a good look. I couldn't hold back anymore. I brought up specific examples like the time they paid for Lisa's spring break trip to Cancun while I worked overtime to afford textbooks, or how they covered her security deposit for her apartment while I had to scrape together my own. I wasn't trying to be petty, I just wanted them to see the pattern. But instead of listening, they doubled down. My dad accused me of making everything about myself, saying they'd helped me plenty over the years. My mom added that I needed to stop living in the past and focus on my own successes. Lisa, of course, couldn't resist one last dig, saying maybe I'd get a car too if I wasn't so uptight all the time. That was it for me. I stood up, thanked them for dinner, and left. I didn't slam the door or yell, I just walked out. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't just about the car or the birthday. It was about years of being treated like I mattered less, and I was done pretending it didn't hurt. When I got home, I called my best friend and told him everything. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen the favoritism firsthand over the years and had been telling me to set boundaries for a long time. My boyfriend agreed, saying I didn't need to keep putting myself in situations where I felt undervalued. The next day, I woke up to a string of texts from my mom. She said she was sorry if I felt hurt but insisted that they'd done what they thought was fair. She ended by saying, Lisa just needed more help right now, and you're strong enough to handle things on your own. It felt like a backhanded compliment, and I didn't reply. Instead, I updated my Reddit post. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive, with many people sharing similar experiences and encouraging me to stand my ground. Some even suggested I go low contact or cut ties completely, though I wasn't sure I was ready for that. For now, I've decided to take a step back. I'm limiting contact with my parents and focusing on the people in my life who actually value me, but part of me can't help wondering if there's more to this story. The favoritism feels too calculated, too deliberate. I'm starting to think there's something bigger going on, and I'm determined to find out what it is. Update 2. A few weeks after the disastrous family dinner, I was starting to settle into my decision to limit contact with my parents. I'd muted the family group chat, ignored the occasional texts, and focused on my own life. Then, out of nowhere, my cousin Julia called me. Julia and I had always been close, but we didn't talk regularly, so it was a little unusual for her to reach out. I answered, curious, and she jumped right in. She told me she'd been following what had happened from the sidelines. Apparently, word about the dinner had spread to the extended family. Some relatives thought I was overreacting, while others were quietly supportive. Julia was firmly in the latter camp. She said she'd noticed the favoritism toward Lisa for years, even as a kid, and she wanted to share something that might shed light on the situation. According to Julia, my parents had a family trust fund set up years ago by our grandparents. The money was supposed to be split evenly between me and Lisa once we turned 18, with the understanding that it would help us with college, first homes, or emergencies. But Julia's mom, my aunt, had heard through the grapevine that my parents had been dipping into that fund for years, almost exclusively for Lisa's benefit. At first, I didn't know how to respond. Julia must have sensed my hesitation because she told me she had proof. A while back, she'd been chatting with Lisa during a family get-together when Lisa casually mentioned how lucky she was to have parents who always had her back financially. It was a throwaway comment, but it stuck with Julia. Over time, she pieced together bits of information from conversations and documents she'd seen at my parents' house. Eventually, she started snooping out of curiosity, she said, and found messages between my parents discussing large withdrawals from the trust fund, all for Lisa. Julia sent me screenshots of what she'd found. There were messages about paying Lisa's rent, covering her trips, and even one about the car. Seeing it in black and white made it all real. My parents had been using money that was supposed to be for both of us to bankroll Lisa's lifestyle, while I'd been scraping by on my own. I thanked Julia for telling me and spent the next day going through every email and document I could find from my parents. I remembered signing something when I was younger, something about the trust, but I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Now I regretted not looking closer. I called a lawyer the next day to get advice. The lawyer was straightforward. If the trust was set up with the intention of being split equally, my parents couldn't legally favor one sibling over the other. She advised me to gather as much information as I could and start building a case. It wasn't about revenge, it was about getting what was rightfully mine. Things escalated quickly after that. Somehow, Lisa found out I was looking into the trust. She called me, furious, accusing me of being selfish and trying to take what was hers. She threw in a few digs about how I'd always been jealous of her, how I couldn't handle her success, and how I was grasping at straws to make myself feel important. I didn't argue with her, I just hung up. Not long after, my parents reached out. First, they tried to play innocent, saying I must have misunderstood the situation. When I didn't back down, they switched tactics, accusing me of trying to tear the family apart over material things. My dad went so far as to call me ungrateful, saying they'd sacrificed so much for me over the years. The lawyer's findings didn't help their case. After reviewing the trust documents and the messages Julia had provided, she confirmed that my parents had blatantly mishandled the funds. Not only had they favored Lisa, but they'd also used some of the money for personal expenses. It was worse than I'd thought. I updated my Reddit post to include everything I'd discovered so far. The response was overwhelming. People were horrified by my parents' actions, calling them toxic manipulators and urging me to take legal action. Some even shared similar stories of family favoritism, and their support gave me the push I needed to keep going. Meanwhile, my parents ramped up their guilt tripping. They left long voicemails about how disappointed they were in me, how I was ruining Christmas by stirring up drama, and how they'd only ever done what they thought was best for the family. Lisa, true to form, doubled down on social media, posting cryptic quotes about snakes in the grass and family betrayal. Through it all, I stayed firm. I started therapy to process not just the current situation, but also the years of resentment I'd been carrying. For the first time, I began to see how deeply my parents' favoritism had affected me, not just financially, but emotionally too. The support from Julia and a few other family members kept me going. One uncle even reached out, offering to help however he could. He'd had his own issues with my parents in the past and said he wasn't surprised by what I'd uncovered. No knowing I wasn't alone made all the difference. As for my parents, they're still trying to spin the narrative in their favor, but the cracks are starting to show. More relatives are finding out what they've done, and the tide seems to be turning. I don't know what's going to happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of the situation. And something tells me this is only the beginning. Update 3. It didn't take long for things to hit a new low. About a week after I spoke with my lawyer and started digging into the trust fund situation, Julia sent me a text with a link to Lisa's social media. I opened it and saw a post that stopped me cold. Lisa had listed the car my parents had just bought her for sale. The caption reads something like, "Selling my baby to fund the vacation of my dreams. Message me if interested." I couldn't believe it. That car had been a gift, supposedly because she needed reliable transportation for work. Now she was trying to turn it into a quick payday for a luxury vacation? It felt like a slap in the face. I immediately saved the post and sent it to my lawyer, along with screenshots of the conversations about the trust fund. She advised me to hold on to everything as evidence and reminded me to let the legal process play out. But I wasn't done. I decided it was time to stop playing nice. I started reaching out to extended family, sharing what I'd learned about the trust fund and how my parents had been misusing it. Most of my relatives were shocked, especially when I told them about the car and Lisa's plans to sell it. A few of them admitted they'd noticed the favoritism over the years but hadn't wanted to get involved. Now, with everything out in the open, they were furious. Not everyone was on my side, though. A handful of relatives accused me of overreacting, saying that I should let it go and focus on my own success. They argued that the trust fund wasn't worth tearing the family apart over. My parents, of course, doubled down. When they heard I'd been talking to the rest of the family, they called me, accusing me of trying to humiliate them. My dad even tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was ruining Lisa's reputation and that I'd regret it when I realized how much family matters. Lisa, meanwhile, took a different approach. She started posting cryptic messages on social media about toxic people and jealousy ruining relationships. She even went so far as to share a story about a friend who couldn't stand to see someone else happy, clearly trying to paint herself as the victim. Mutual friends and acquaintances started reaching out to me, asking what was going on. I told them the truth, sticking to the facts and letting them decide for themselves. Through all of this, therapy became my lifeline. My therapist helped me unpack the years of favoritism and the way my parents' actions had shaped my relationship with them and with myself. She pointed out that their behavior wasn't just about Lisa, it was also about control. By favoring Lisa and making me fend for myself, they'd kept me at arm's length while ensuring she stayed dependent on them. It was a cycle, and breaking it meant standing my ground, no matter how uncomfortable things got. The next big blow came when my parents gave me an ultimatum. They called me again, this time with a clear message. If I didn't drop the legal inquiry into the trust fund, I would be cut out of the family entirely. They claimed I was tearing the family apart over money and accused me of being greedy and ungrateful. I listened quietly, let them finish, and then calmly told them I wasn't backing down. If they wanted to cut me out, that was their choice, but I wasn't going to let them bully me into silence. That decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. My boyfriend was incredibly supportive, reminding me that I didn't have to tolerate toxic behavior just because it came from family. He even suggested that going no contact with my parents might be the healthiest option in the long run. I wasn't sure I was ready for that, but knowing he had my back made a world of difference. I updated my Reddit post again, sharing the latest developments. The response was overwhelming. People called me a hero for standing up to a toxic family system and encouraged me to keep fighting for what was right. Many shared their own stories of favoritism and betrayal, and their words gave me the strength to move forward. With my lawyer's help, I officially filed a claim regarding the trust fund. It wasn't just about the money, it was about holding my parents accountable for their actions. As expected, Lisa didn't take the news well. She started spreading lies about me to mutual friends and family, claiming I was making things up and out to destroy her life. Some people believed her, but many didn't. The evidence spoke for itself, and the more she lashed out, the worse she looked. The extended family continued to react in waves. Some relatives were horrified by what my parents had done and rallied behind me, while others stayed quiet or sided with my parents. The divide was growing, and it was clear there was no going back to how things were before. Then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my parents' lawyer, outlining their intention to countersue me for defamation and emotional distress. My lawyer wasn't worried, she said their case had no merit, but the letter was a clear sign that things were about to escalate even further. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Update 4. Not long after receiving the countersuit threat from my parents' lawyer, I sat down with my own attorney to figure out the next steps. She wasn't worried about their claims. "This is a scare tactic," she said, laying out the likely goal, to pressure me into dropping my investigation into the trust fund. She assured me that my case was solid and suggested we double down on uncovering the financial details. Meanwhile, Lisa was keeping herself busy online. She posted yet another cryptic message on her social media about snakes in the grass and how some people can't stand to see others happy. She even shared a story about how family betrayal was the ultimate sin, accompanied by a glamorous selfie in her new designer sunglasses. It was obvious she was stirring the pot, and it worked. Mutual friends started messaging me, asking for my side of the story. I kept my responses brief, sticking to the facts. Then, an aunt reached out, offering to mediate between me and my parents. She thought this whole thing had gotten out of hand and wanted to help us find common ground. I knew her intentions were good, but I declined. There was no point in mediation when my parents refused to acknowledge what they'd done. The money wasn't the only issue, it was the years of blatant favoritism and manipulation. My lawyer and I pressed on with the financial audit. The audit turned up exactly what I suspected. Not only had my parents funneled a significant portion of the trust fund to Lisa over the years, but they'd also used the money for personal luxuries. One large withdrawal had gone toward a high-end kitchen renovation. Another was for a vacation to Europe my parents had taken a few years ago, which they'd claimed was a gift from a friend. The evidence kept piling up, and it was damning. When I shared the findings in my latest Reddit update, the response was overwhelming. People were furious on my behalf, with many suggesting I go to law enforcement. Some pointed out that this could qualify as fraud, depending on how the trust was structured. Others encouraged me to stay strong and not let my parents intimidate me. Their support kept me grounded as the situation grew more chaotic. Around this time, my parents started to panic. They began calling and texting, alternating between half-hearted apologies and subtle threats. My mom left a voicemail saying they were willing to talk if I was ready to put this behind us. My dad sent a long text about how this whole ordeal was tearing the family apart, and that I needed to think about the bigger picture. Neither of them admitted to any wrongdoing. They just wanted me to drop the case. I didn't respond. My lawyer advised me to keep all communication through legal channels moving forward, and I agreed. The only thing I told them was that I wouldn't consider reconciliation until they fully acknowledged their actions and repaid what they owed. Unsurprisingly, they didn't take that well. Lisa, of course, couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. She made another public post, this time directly referencing me. You can try all you want, but you'll never get a dime. Mom and dad love me more anyway. I saved the post and sent it to my lawyer. It wasn't just petty, it was proof of her entitlement and my parents' clear favoritism. Despite everything, therapy was helping. I was starting to see the patterns in my parents' behavior and how their favoritism had shaped my self-esteem over the years. Breaking that cycle wasn't easy, but I was determined. My therapist reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary. As more of the extended family learned about the trust fund fiasco, the division grew deeper. Several cousins reached out to show their support, saying they'd always suspected my parents favored Lisa, but hadn't realized how far it went. Others stayed quiet, likely unsure which side to take. My parents had always been good at maintaining their perfect family image, and this was shattering it. Then, the story leaked outside the family. A mutual friend posted something vague about parents playing favorites and getting caught, and it wasn't hard for people to connect the dots. Suddenly, people I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me, asking if the rumors were true. I stuck to the facts, refusing to badmouth anyone, but the damage to my parents' reputation was done. Their carefully curated image was crumbling, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Amidst the chaos, an unexpected ally emerged. My uncle, someone I'd barely spoken to in years, reached out. He told me he'd experienced similar treatment from my parents when they were younger. They'd always been controlling and dismissive, and he wasn't surprised they'd pulled this with me. He offered both financial and emotional support, which I gratefully accepted. Knowing someone else had been through this made me feel less alone. Just when I thought I'd seen everything, my lawyer called with a bombshell. During the audit, she'd uncovered a major asset, a piece of property that was supposed to be in my name but had been illegally transferred to Lisa years ago. It was clear my parents had gone to great lengths to favor her, even at my expense. This revelation changes everything. The stakes are higher now, and I'm more determined than ever to see this through. I'll update when I have more. Update 5. The court date finally arrived, and as much as I thought I'd prepared myself, stepping into that courtroom made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. My lawyer was confident, armed with piles of evidence, bank statements, emails, and the trust documents that painted a clear picture of what my parents had done. On the other side of the room, my parents sat stiffly, whispering to each other. Lisa was there too, scrolling through her phone like none of this mattered. The first day was mostly procedural, setting the stage and outlining the case. It wasn't until the second day that things started to heat up. Lisa was called to testify, and her performance was something. She claimed she had no idea the funds were misused, insisting she thought all the money she received was simply gifts from generous parents who wanted to help her succeed. She talked about how hard her life had been lately, trying to frame herself as the victim in all this. My lawyer didn't let it slide. She presented text messages between Lisa and my parents discussing the trust fund and how they planned to use it. One message even mentioned transferring property into Lisa's name because she needed it more. Lisa's face turned bright red as the messages were read aloud. She stammered through her answers, trying to deflect blame, but the damage was done. Next, my parents were put on the stand. They stuck to their story that the funds were used in the best interest of the family. They downplayed the favoritism, claiming they'd helped me in other ways over the years. My lawyer, again, was ready. She showed receipts for the kitchen renovation and European vacation, directly tying the funds to personal luxuries. She also pointed out the glaring absence of similar financial support for me. The turning point came when my lawyer presented the illegally transferred property. She laid out a timeline showing how it had originally been in my name, only to be quietly shifted to Lisa without my knowledge. The judge was visibly unimpressed, especially when my parents tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding. By the third day, word about the trial had spread. A few acquaintances who had once been close to my parents showed up to watch, their faces a mix of shock and disappointment as the evidence mounted. It was clear my parents' carefully curated image of a happy, supportive family was crumbling in front of them. Midway through the proceedings, my parents' lawyer approached mine with a settlement offer. They were willing to return a portion of the funds if I agreed to drop the case. My lawyer showed me the offer, but it was laughably low compared to what they'd taken, and there was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I rejected it without hesitation. The trial wrapped up with my lawyer delivering a powerful closing argument, summarizing the years of favoritism, the misuse of funds, and the blatant disregard for the trust's terms. She left no room for doubt. The verdict came quickly after that. The court ruled in my favor. I was awarded a substantial portion of the misused funds, as well as ownership of the illegally transferred property. The judge made it clear that my parents had acted in bad faith, and while there were no criminal charges, their reputation was in shambles. Lisa, predictably, didn't take it well. Within hours of the verdict, she posted a long, dramatic rant on social media about how I'd ruined her life and how money wasn't everything. She claimed I'd betrayed the family and warned others to watch their backs. It was hard not to laugh at the irony. My parents, on the other hand, went silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. They didn't even try to apologize or explain themselves. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to give it up. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding relationships with the family members who had supported me. Julia and I became closer than ever, and my uncle, who had stood by me through this mess, helped me navigate the next steps with the property and funds. Therapy also became a cornerstone of my healing. For years, I'd craved my parents' approval, but now I was learning to let that go. The biggest surprise came from my boyfriend. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, he proposed. He told me he admired my strength and couldn't imagine his life without me. It was the happiest moment I'd had in years, and it felt like the start of something new. something better. I made the final break with my parents shortly after. I blocked them and Lisa on all platforms and made it clear to mutual friends and relatives that I wasn't interested in reconciliation. This wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about protecting myself from people who had proven, time and again, that they didn't have my best interests at heart. I shared my final update on Reddit, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people commented, praising my resilience and determination. Many shared their own stories of family drama and thanked me for showing them it was okay to stand up for yourself, even against your own family. Looking back, I'm proud of how far I've come. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. For the first time, I feel free to live my life on my own terms, without the weight of my family's toxicity holding me back. This is my closure, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.